The motorcade doesn't stop when the first explosion hits. It hesitates. Just half a second. Long enough for every trained instinct inside President Will Derringer to scream that something is wrong. Glass rains down the boulevard like sharp confetti. The shockwave slams into the armored limousine, rattling teeth, rattling bones, rattling the carefully rehearsed illusion of control. Sirens howl. Tires shriek. Somewhere behind them, people are screaming, and nobody knows if it's panic or pain. Inside the car, Derringer grips the leather seat, knuckles white. Former action star. Current President of the United States. A man who once pretended to save the world on screen, now realizing how thin the line is between fiction and blood. Across from him, the Secret Service agent's voice is calm, too calm. That's never a good sign. Mr. President. Heads down. The second blast comes faster. Closer. The car lifts, just slightly, like it's about to leave the ground. Derringer's stomach floats. For one breathless moment, he's sure this is it. Fade to black. Roll credits. But the car lands. Hard. They're moving again, weaving through chaos, and Derringer finally dares to look out the window. Smoke coils into the sky. Flags burn. This wasn't random. This was precise. Planned. A message written in fire. And it wasn't meant just for him. 3,000 miles away, in a quiet foreign capital soaked in early morning rain, Prime Minister Sam Clarke watches the same footage on a muted television. Former Special Forces. Decorated. Disciplined. The kind of man who reads threats the way others read weather reports. His jaw tightens as the explosion replays in slow motion. He doesn't need sound to understand it. This is coordinated, he mutters. An aide asks who could possibly be bold enough to attack two Allied leaders on the same day. Clarke doesn't answer. His eyes are locked on a single frame. An unmarked drone slipping through the chaos before the blast. Military grade. Black market. Familiar. That's when his phone vibrates. No caller ID. Just a message. You should have stayed retired. Clarke exhales slowly. He's seen this handwriting before, not literal ink, but style. Signature. A ghost from operations that were never meant to exist. Missions buried so deep, even history forgot them. Back in Washington, Derringer is rushed into an underground safe room, the walls humming with power and panic. Advisors argue. Generals shout. Everyone wants answers now. Derringer wants something simpler. Who's trying to kill us? He asks. Silence. Because the truth is worse than any single name. Intelligence reports pour in like floodwater. Similar attack patterns. Multiple countries. Heads of state targeted within hours of each other. This isn't terrorism. It's choreography. Someone is pulling the strings. And then the impossible suggestion lands in the room. They need Clarke. Derringer almost laughs. The man he publicly clashed with. The one he mocked during a summit, cameras rolling, jokes flying. Politics made them rivals. Pride made them enemies. But pride doesn't stop bullets. Hours later, under a sky heavy with storm clouds, two helicopters touch down on the same remote airstrip. Armed guards everywhere, fingers near triggers, trust near zero. Clarke steps out first. No smile, no hesitation. Just a man measuring distance, exits, threats. Derringer follows, trying to project confidence, failing just a little. Their eyes meet across the tarmac. For a moment, nobody speaks. Then Clarke breaks the silence. Still think this job is all handshakes and speeches? Derringer's smile is tight. Still think hiding in the shadows keeps you clean? The air between them crackles, not just with old insults, but with unfinished business. Men who chose different paths after the same war. Men who survived when others didn't. A siren wails in the distance. Too close. Clarke's head snaps up. That's not ours. The ground trembles. The siren dies as quickly as it began. Too quickly. Clarke is already moving, hand up, signaling silence. Guards freeze mid-step, boots scraping gravel. Derringer watches him work. How his eyes don't dart, they calculate. Angles. Shadows. The kind of focus you don't learn in politics or press briefings. The kind that comes from knowing exactly how people die. A heartbeat passes. Then another. Nothing explodes. Clarke lowers his hand. Test, he says. Someone checking response time. Derringer exhales through his nose. You're telling me that was a rehearsal? I'm telling you, Clarke replies. They're close enough to watch us flinch. They're rushed inside a reinforced hangar, the doors slamming shut with a metallic echo that feels final. Maps bloom across digital tables. Red markers multiply by the second. Attempted assassinations. Successful ones, too. A president in Eastern Europe. A monarch's convoy wiped out on a mountain pass. No claims of responsibility. No manifesto. Just precision and silence. This isn't ideology, Clarke says, leaning over the table. It's elimination. Derringer studies the screen, his reflection fractured across glass and data. Then what's the end game? Clarke finally looks at him. Decapitation. You cut off leadership, nations panic. Panic makes people beg for control. And who offers that control, Derringer asks. That's the question they want us too busy dying to ask. An analyst interrupts, voice tight. They've traced the drone signature from Washington. Custom firmware, off-the-books military tech. Clarke stiffens when he sees the identifier code. His throat tightens, just slightly. Derringer notices. You recognize it, he says. Clarke doesn't answer immediately. When he does, his voice is lower. I helped design it. Years ago. Black Operations. Joint Task Force. We were told it was dismantled. Was it? Clarke straightens. Someone rebuilt it. Silence presses in. Someone rebuilt it. Silence presses in. This isn't just a threat anymore. It's personal. They're given 5 minutes alone while advisors argue behind soundproof glass. The hangar hums. Somewhere above them, rain drums against steel. You never liked me, Derringer says, breaking it. Clarke snorts. You turned war into a punchline. You turned it into a religion. Their eyes lock. Old resentment flares, hot and familiar. Men shaped by the same conflict, scarred differently. Derringer softens first. They're using us, Sam. Our history. Our mistakes. Clarke's jaw works. I know. A secure line crackles to life. An encrypted feed forces itself onto the main screen. No traceable origin. Just a symbol. An abstract crown split down the middle. Then a voice. Distorted. Calm. Gentlemen. Thank you for assembling so promptly. Every guard raises their weapon. Clarke doesn't blink. You've been busy, the voice continues. Surviving. Impressive. But survival isn't victory. Derringer steps forward. You want to talk? Let's talk. A chuckle filters through static. You misunderstand. This isn't negotiation. This is notification. The screen fills with live video. A small European airport. Familiar faces. Clarke's chest tightens as he recognizes the delegation, his foreign minister among them. The timestamp blinks, live. You have 12 hours, the voice says. Disband your joint security accords. Withdraw your militaries from shared command. And if we don't, Derringer asks. The camera zooms in, close enough to see fear in a man's eyes. Close enough to see the tremor in his hands. You've already seen what happens. The feed cuts. For a long moment, nobody speaks. Then the room erupts, orders, shouting, chaos. Clarke stands perfectly still. His hands are clenched so tight his knuckles ache. They won't stop, Derringer says quietly. Even if we comply. Clarke nods. Compliance proves weakness, and resistance paints a target. Their eyes meet again. No politics left now, just reality. Clarke turns back to the map, fingers flying. We don't have the luxury of trust, he says. But we have something better. Derringer raises an eyebrow. What's that? Shared enemies, Clarke replies, and ghosts they think are buried. Derringer feels it then, that old, dangerous spark, the one that got men killed in wars won. Tell me what you need. Clarke doesn't hesitate. I need access, unrestricted, assets you swore never to use again. And I need you? Derringer asks. Clarke finally allows himself a thin smile. You need someone who knows how these people think. Outside, thunder rolls. Somewhere far away, another leader is being hunted. The clock has started ticking. The jet cuts through the night like a blade, engines growling low and steady. Inside, the cabin lights are dimmed, faces lit by screens and half-spoken fears. Derringer sits strapped in, suit jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up like he's preparing for a fight instead of a summit-turned-manhunt. Across from him, Clarke scrolls through classified files that technically no longer exist. Names, operations, graves. Everything about this group points back to one place, Clarke says. A program so deniable it didn't even have a name. We called it Crownfall. Derringer frowns. That sounds ominous. It was, Clarke replies. Designed to remove unstable leadership before wars could start. Silent. Surgical. No flags. And now it's doing the opposite, Derringer says. Clarke nods. Because it was never dismantled, just sold. The jet hits turbulence. Coffee sloshes. Somewhere in the cabin, a junior officer whispers a prayer under their breath. Derringer doesn't look back. His mind is stuck on one word. Sold. So this is about money, he asks. No, Clarke says quietly. It's about belief. Someone thinks the world needs fewer leaders, fewer voices, one direction. Derringer leans back, rubbing his temple. You're telling me we're fighting an idea. I'm telling you, Clarke replies. Ideas don't bleed. People do. They land at a remote intelligence facility carved into rock. No markings, no welcome, just doors that swallow them whole. Inside, the air smells like ozone and old secrets. Clarke moves through the corridors like muscle memory is guiding him. Derringer notices how no one stops them. That's not comforting. They're led into a briefing room where a single woman waits. Mid-40s, sharp eyes. Scars she doesn't bother hiding. Clarke stiffens. Didn't expect to see you alive, she says. Didn't expect to see you at all, Clarke replies. This is Director Elena Voss. Derringer blinks. As in, presumed dead? Voss smiles thinly. Presumed convenient. She brings up a holographic display. Faces rotate slowly. Men and women from different nations, different backgrounds. One thing in common, each had access to Crownfall. Meet the consortium, Voss says. Former architects of controlled chaos. They believe democracy is inefficient, too noisy, too slow. And murder is faster. Derringer snaps. Cleaner, Voss corrects. In their minds. Clarke's gaze stops on one face. His breath catches. Just for a second, Voss notices. You know him. I trained him, Clarke says. Taught him how to disappear. Name? Derringer asks. Clarke swallows. Lucas Kane. The room seems to dim. Voss continues. Kane vanished 5 years ago. Off-grid. We thought he was dead. He never goes quiet, Clarke says. Not unless he's building something. As if summoned, alarms flare red. An analyst rushes in pale. We've lost contact with the delegation from the video feed. Derringer's heart sinks. Lost contact how? Feeds went dark. Thermal signatures extinguished. Silence. Heavy. Final. Clarke closes his eyes. Just for a moment. Then they're open again. Harder. Sharper. They accelerated the timeline, he says, which means they're afraid. Of us? Derringer asks. Of what we might remember, Clarke replies. Voss steps closer. There's more. We intercepted a partial transmission. Kane isn't just targeting leaders. The display shifts. A map of the world lights up with blinking points. Schools, hospitals, infrastructure. Civilians. He's destabilizing everything, Derringer whispers. No, Clarke says. He's forcing us to choose. Another message breaks through. Audio only. Kane's voice clear, almost friendly. Sam, it says. I wondered how long it would take you. Clarke's jaw tightens. You taught me that leaders hide behind symbols, Kane continues. Flags, titles, faces on screens. Strip those away, and people beg for order. Derringer leans in. You're killing innocents. A pause. Then Kane laughs softly. Innocence is a luxury of stability. The transmission ends. Voss turns to them. We have a location. Temporary. He wants you to come. Derringer doesn't hesitate. Then we go. Clarke looks at him, something like respect flickering through the exhaustion. He's baiting us. Derringer nods. Good. I'm tired of being hunted. Outside the mountain, the world teeters. Inside, two men prepare to walk straight into the fire, knowing full well one of them might not walk back out. Night swallows the convoy as it snakes through the industrial outskirts of the city. No lights, no sirens. Just dark vehicles sliding through darker streets, rain turning asphalt into mirrors. Derringer watches reflections shatter beneath them and wonders how many times a man can tempt fate before it stops playing along. Clarke sits beside him, silent, assembling a rifle with slow precision. Not rushed, not nervous, focused. The kind of calm that only comes when fear has already been acknowledged and set aside. This place, Derringer says quietly, reading the satellite image on his tablet. Abandoned rail terminal? Officially, Clarke replies. Unofficially, it's a graveyard for deals that never existed. They arrive without resistance. That's the first warning. The terminal looms ahead, concrete bones jutting into the sky. Wind whistles through broken windows, carrying the smell of rust and oil. Their team fans out, footsteps echoing too loudly in the hollow space. Derringer's pulse pounds in his ears. Every shadow feels intentional. Then the lights snap on. Harsh. Blinding. A slow clap echoes from the far end of the terminal. One man steps forward, hands visible, relaxed. Lucas Kane looks exactly like Clarke remembers. Older, yes, but untouched by doubt. His eyes are bright, alive with purpose. Still leading from the front, Kane says, You never could resist the dramatic entrance. Clarke doesn't raise his weapon. You're standing in the open. Kane smiles. Because you won't shoot me. Derringer glances between them. He sounds very confident for someone outnumbered. Kane turns his gaze to Derringer, assessing. Ah. The actor-president. I liked your movies. You always knew where the camera was. And you, Derringer replies, are about to tell me this isn't personal. Kane chuckles. Everything is personal. That's why it works. He gestures, and screens flicker to life around the terminal. Live feeds. Cities. People frozen mid-step, unaware. Bomb vests. Trigger lights blinking red. Clarke's breath catches. You said this was about leadership. It is, Kane says calmly. Leaders teach people where to look, who to blame, who to follow. Remove them, and society shows its true face. This isn't philosophy, Derringer snaps. It's slaughter. Kane's smile fades. This is inevitability. He steps closer to Clarke. You trained me to see the big picture. You just couldn't accept where it led. Clarke finally raises his rifle, but not at Kane. At the screens. You don't control chaos, he says. You drown in it. Kane leans in. I already have control. You're here. He's here. He nods toward Derringer. Exactly as planned. That's when Clarke understands. You wanted us together, he says. Yes, Kane replies softly. Because divided, you're symbols. Together, you're a solution people can rally behind. He spreads his arms. Or a cautionary tale. Derringer feels it then. The trap snapping shut. You're going to kill us. Publicly, not kill, Kane corrects. Break. Broadcasted. The world watches their strongest allies fail. Faith collapses. Clarke's jaw tightens. You always did need an audience. Kane's eyes flash. And you always underestimated belief. A gunshot cracks the air. Not from Kane's side. One of Derringer's guards drops, blood blooming across his chest. Another shot. Then another shot. Then another. Muzzle flashes erupt from the shadows behind them. The terminal explodes into chaos. Screams. Shattered glass. Orders drowned by gunfire. Ambush, someone yells. Kane is already moving, disappearing into smoke and sparks. Clarke grabs Derringer, shoving him behind concrete as bullets chew through metal inches from their heads. "You trust me now?" Clarke shouts over the noise. Derringer reloads a fallen weapon with shaking hands. "I trust you more than him." They move together, awkward at first, then instinctive. Clarke clearing paths. Derringer covering angles. Two men from different worlds stitched together by necessity. Blood slicks the floor. The air stings with cordite. They reach a service corridor. Clarke slams the door, breathing hard. For the first time, Derringer sees it. The crack in his armor. "He knew we'd come," Derringer says. Clarke nods. "And he let us live." A screen on the wall flickers to life. Kane's face fills it, calm amid the carnage. "Next time," Kane says, "bring fewer friends." The screen goes dark. Outside, sirens approach. Too late. Derringer stares at the blackened glass. "He's not running," he says. "He's escalating." Clarke wipes blood from his knuckles. So are we. Because now, the world knows their faces. The fallout is immediate, brutal, global. By sunrise, every major network is looping the same grainy footage. Derringer dragged through smoke, Clarke firing into shadows, bodies on concrete. Headlines don't ask questions. They assign blame. Summit turns slaughter. Leaders lure death. Approval ratings nosedive. Markets shudder. Allies hesitate. Kane wanted spectacle. He got it. They relocate twice in 6 hours. Safe houses become temporary illusions. Every room is searched, swept, stripped. Derringer sits alone in one of them, staring at a muted TV while a medic stitches a shallow cut along his arm. He doesn't flinch. He barely feels it. "This is my fault," he says suddenly. The medic pauses. "Sir, I brought cameras into a war," Derringer continues. "I made this personal." Across the room, Clarke watches without comment. When the medic leaves, Clarke finally speaks. "Kane didn't need you to fail," he says. "He needed you to exist." Derringer looks up. "Meaning?" "Meaning symbols don't have to be strong. They just have to be visible." An alert pings. Voss appears on a secure tablet feed, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "We've confirmed it," she says. "Kane has embedded sleeper cells inside civilian infrastructure. Triggers tied to biometric confirmation. If either of you die, the system assumes collapse and accelerates." Derringer's throat tightens. "So killing us speeds this up. And keeping you alive slows it," Clarke finishes. Voss nods. "Which means Kane's next move won't be a bullet." As if on cue, power flickers, then returns. Clarke stiffens. "Say it," Derringer says. Voss exhales. He's taken control of the emergency broadcast systems. Multiple countries. Rolling blackouts. Disinformation spikes. He's eroding trust in real time. The screen switches to live footage. Citizens arguing in the dark. Soldiers confused by conflicting orders. Panic spreading faster than facts. "He's teaching the world to live without leaders," Derringer whispers. "No," Clarke says. "He's daring us to prove him wrong." They regroup in a hardened command bunker. Maps everywhere. Lines redrawn hourly. Options narrowing. Clarke outlines a plan. Risky. Incomplete. Borderline insane. Infiltrate Kane's core network node. Sever the biometric failsafes. Cut the head off without triggering the body. "And you?" Derringer asks. Clarke meets his gaze. "I go in." Derringer shakes his head. "You don't get to be the martyr." "I'm the only one Kane will let close," Clarke replies. "Because he still thinks this is between us." Derringer steps forward. "Then he's wrong." They argue. Quietly. Fiercely. Two men circling the same truth from different angles. Finally, Clarke stops. "You're afraid," he says. Derringer nods. "Yeah, but not of dying." He taps his chest. "Of being irrelevant. Of proving him right." Clarke studies him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he adjusts the plan. Adds a second insertion vector, a public address. A risk Kane won't anticipate. Fine, Clarke says. But if this works, it won't be clean. Derringer almost smiles. Nothing ever is. Hours later, as dusk bleeds into night, Derringer stands before a camera again. No teleprompter. No flag backdrop. Just him. Tired. Human. Honest. They want you to believe leadership is a lie, he says, voice steady. That order only comes from fear. He leans closer. They're wrong. Order comes from us. From choosing not to tear each other apart. Somewhere, Kane is watching. Derringer knows it, feels it. The blackout hits at midnight. Not gradual. Not rolling. Total. Cities vanish into darkness like someone flipped a switch on civilization itself. Traffic lights die. Hospitals switch to backup power. Phones buzz once, then fall silent. Kane isn't hiding anymore. He's accelerating. Deep beneath an abandoned coastal fortress, Clarke moves through concrete corridors, lit only by emergency strips. Salt air burns his lungs. Every step echoes too loudly. He knows this place. He helped design its redundancies, its kill paths, its false sanctuaries. He'll expect me here, Clarke thinks. That's the point. Above ground, miles away, Derringer watches the same darkness spread across a tactical map. Each dead zone pulses like a heartbeat. His fingers curl into fists. Signal's holding, an operator says. Barely. Derringer nods. Keep it live. Clarke breaches the final chamber alone. The room is vast, circular, servers humming like a mechanical hive. And at the center, Lucas Kane. Calm. Waiting. You're late, Kane says without turning. Clarke raises his weapon. You wanted me. Kane smiles, still facing the screens. I wanted you to choose. He gestures. Live feeds ignite around them. Riots. Fires. Soldiers arguing over contradictory orders. The world tearing itself open. All this, Kane says softly, because people believed in faces instead of systems. Clarke's voice is steady. You're not fixing the world. You're breaking it so you can feel right. Kane turns then. His eyes burn. I'm freeing it. A sudden alert flashes. Kane frowns. That shouldn't be happening. Above ground, Derringer steps closer to the camera as technicians scramble. The broadcast punches through emergency frequencies worldwide. No polish, no edits, just truth, raw and unarmored. You're scared, Derringer says to millions sitting in the dark. So am I. But fear doesn't get to decide who we are. In the fortress, Kane's screen's fracture feeds splitting, rerouting, overridden by Derringer's voice. Kane's composure cracks. What did you do? Kane snaps. Clarke advances. You built your system to react to us. You forgot about them. Kane lunges for a console. Clarke fires. Not to kill, but to disable. Sparks explode. Alarms scream. The biometric failsafes begin to unravel. Kane laughs, wild now. You think this stops it? The idea survives. Clarke closes the distance, breath ragged. Ideas don't survive without people. The facility begins to flood, automatic containment triggered. Water surges in, cold and fast. Kane stumbles back, slipping. For the first time, fear flashes across his face. Sam. Kane starts. Clarke hesitates. A lifetime of shared history in a single breath. Then he turns away. Above, the lights flicker back on across the world, one city at a time, one breath at a time. Clarke dives as the chamber collapses behind him. Water roars through the ruins of the fortress, swallowing lights, swallowing sound. Clarke fights it blind, lungs burning, fingers scraping concrete until air. Hands grab him, drag him, tossing, choking, alive. When he finally focuses, he's on the deck of a rescue boat. Dawn breaking over a restless sea. Medics shout. Radios crackle. And somewhere through the noise, one word cuts clean. Lights are back. Across the world, cities breathe again. Power grids stabilize. Emergency channels normalize. The panic doesn't vanish, but it slows. And slowing is enough. Clarke closes his eyes. Just for a second. By the time he's flown to the command center, the truth has settled in. Kane didn't escape. No body was recovered. No signal detected. Dead or buried under a mountain of steel and water. It doesn't matter. The system he built is gone. The fail-safes dismantled. The crown shattered. Derringer is waiting when Clarke arrives. No cameras, no aides. Just two exhausted men standing in a quiet room that smells like stale coffee and relief. They don't speak at first. Then Derringer steps forward and pulls Clarke into a hard, wordless embrace. Clarke stiffens, then lets it happen. "You scared the hell out of me," Derringer mutters. Clarke exhales. Likewise. The days that follow are messy. Investigations, hearings, apologies that don't quite land. Some leaders never come back. Some trust is gone for good. But something unexpected happens too. People listen again. Not because they're told to, but because they want to. Derringer addresses the world one last time, not from a podium, but from a small, unmarked room. "We failed in ways that matter," he says, "and we'll answer for that. But we didn't disappear. We didn't hide, and we won't stop showing up. No grand promises, just presence." Clarke declines interviews. He slips back into the shadows where he's most useful, advising quietly, dismantling remnants before they can grow teeth. Ghosts cleaning up other ghosts. Weeks later, the two men meet once more on neutral ground, no security in sight. A park, children laughing nearby, life insisting on itself. "They'll write this however they want," Derringer says, watching the trees sway. Clarke nods. "They always do." Derringer glances at him. "You ever regret training, Kane?" Clarke thinks. A long moment. "I regret not seeing him clearly." "That's different." Derringer smiles faintly. "You still think leadership matters?" Clarke looks around, at families, at movement, at noise and imperfection. "I think it's fragile," he says, "which makes it worth protecting." They shake hands, not as symbols, not as rivals, just as men who stood when it counted. As Clarke walks away, Derringer stays behind, listening to the city breathe. Sirens in the distance. Laughter closer still. The world isn't fixed, but it's still here. When a movie pairs two global power fantasies, political leadership and action hero swagger, you expect noise, scale, and spectacle. What makes Heads of State intriguing is that it isn't built by a traditional blockbuster lifer, but by Ilya Naishuller, a filmmaker whose entire career has been about breaking the rules of how action is supposed to feel. This is the same director who exploded onto the scene with Hardcore Henry, a first-person action experiment that felt less like a movie and more like being shoved headfirst into a video game. Later, with Nobody, he proved he could translate that anarchic energy into a studio framework without losing personality. Heads of State is his biggest canvas yet, and easily his strangest challenge. Naishuller's creative DNA is rooted in momentum. He doesn't treat action as punctuation between story beats. Action is the language. Even when characters stop talking, the movie keeps communicating through movement, rhythm, and visual surprise. That philosophy matters here because Heads of State isn't just an action film. It's a political action comedy, a genre that lives or dies on tone. Too serious, and it becomes self-important. Too silly, and the stakes evaporate. Naishuller's vision sits in that narrow, dangerous middle ground where absurdity and urgency coexist. The premise itself almost dares the director to fail. Two world leaders forced into a high-octane survival scenario, blending geopolitical satire with bruising action. On paper, this could have easily turned into a glossy, forgettable streaming spectacle. What Naishuller brings is an instinct for chaos that feels physical. He wants the audience to feel the impact of every hit, every chase, every bad decision spiraling out of control. His action scenes are rarely about elegance. They're about desperation. People get tired. They make mistakes. They improvise. That sensibility is the backbone of Heads of State. This project also represents a significant shift in scale for Naishuller. His earlier films, even when commercially successful, felt scrappy, designed around clever constraints and tactile intimacy. Here, he's working with Amazon MGM Studios, a budget that supports globe-trotting spectacle, and two leads whose star personas are larger than the characters they play. The director's challenge isn't just technical, it's tonal control. How do you make a movie that acknowledges the absurdity of its concept without winking so hard that nothing matters? Naishuller's answer lies in contrast. He has always been fascinated by placing ordinary human reactions inside extraordinary situations. In Nobody, Bob Odenkirk's mild-mannered exhaustion made the violence land harder. In Heads of State, that same philosophy applies to power. These characters may hold the highest offices in the world, but Naishuller's lens strips away the myth of invincibility. Leadership doesn't mean competence under fire. Titles don't stop bullets. The humor is born from watching authority figures lose control and having to earn it back the hard way. Another crucial element of the director's vision is collaboration. Naishuller isn't an isolated auteur in the traditional sense. He builds films around performers, shaping sequences to their physicality and timing. With Idris Elba and John Cena, he's working with two actors who project authority in completely different ways. Elba through intensity and gravitas, Cena through self-aware bravado. The director's job is to let those energies collide rather than smooth them out. Expect action scenes designed not just for spectacle, but for personality clashes baked directly into choreography and pacing. Stylistically, Naishuller gravitates toward clarity over polish. He favors camera movement that puts you inside the action rather than observing it safely. Even with a larger budget, his vision resists the weightless, over-edited look that plagues many modern action comedies. The goal isn't just to entertain, but to engage your nervous system. If the film works, you won't just laugh, you'll flinch. At its core, Heads of State reflects Naishuller's ongoing obsession with systems breaking down. Whether it's societal expectations, bureaucratic power, or the illusion of control, his films love pushing characters until structure collapses and instinct takes over. That thematic through-line gives this project more purpose than its premise initially suggests. Beneath the jokes and explosions is a director asking a simple question. What happens when the people at the top are just as lost as everyone else? But vision alone doesn't make a movie. Ideas need structure, rhythm, and dialogue sharp enough to keep up with the momentum Naishuller demands. And that brings us to the foundation beneath the spectacle. The writing process that shaped this chaos into a story that can actually move, breathe, and land its punches. If the director provides velocity, the screenplay decides where that momentum actually goes. Heads of State is built on a deceptively tricky writing challenge, balancing political satire, buddy comedy friction, and full-bodied action without letting any one element swallow the others. The script had to justify explosions without trivializing global stakes, and it had to generate laughs without turning its leaders into cartoons. That tightrope walk defines the film's entire narrative personality. At its core, this is an original screenplay rather than an adaptation, which already places it at a slight disadvantage in a marketplace dominated by IP recognition. That decision signals confidence. The writers weren't leaning on nostalgia or brand familiarity. They were betting on character dynamics and premise execution. The story doesn't waste time over explaining its setup. Power, privilege, and public image are established quickly, then dismantled just as fast once the plot engine kicks in. The inciting incident arrives early, and when it hits, the script makes a crucial choice. It traps the characters together rather than sending them on parallel journeys. That confinement is the secret weapon. The narrative structure follows a classic collision arc. Two figures with opposing temperaments, philosophies, and leadership styles are forced into proximity by circumstance. The script understands that comedy isn't born from jokes alone. It comes from pressure. Every scene is engineered to apply stress, physical danger, moral disagreement, and clashing egos all layered at once. Dialogue often serves double duty, advancing plot while simultaneously redefining power dynamics. Who takes charge? Who hesitates? Who hides behind rhetoric when action is required? The screenplay keeps asking these questions, then changing the answers. One of the script's smarter choices is refusing to idealize competence. These characters are not hyper-efficient action avatars. They hesitate. They miscalculate. They argue at the worst possible moments. That friction creates narrative propulsion. Instead of clean three-act symmetry, the story unfolds in escalating complications, each problem spawning another before the previous one is fully resolved. The effect feels messy in a way that mirrors real crisis management plans collapse. Improvisation takes over, and survival becomes less about strategy and more about adaptability. Tonally, the writing leans into contrast. High-stakes scenarios are punctured by blunt, sometimes awkward humor rather than polished punchlines. The comedy often comes from timing and reaction rather than wordplay. A pause. A look. A line delivered one beat too late. That restraint keeps the humor grounded. The script trusts the actors to sell the joke through behavior, not exposition. When it does reach for broader comedy, it earns it by letting tension build first. The political satire operates on a surface level rather than diving into specific ideology. This is intentional. The screenplay avoids anchoring itself to real-world administrations or policies, opting instead for archetypes of leadership: the idealist, the pragmatist, the image-conscious figurehead, the reluctant enforcer. That abstraction keeps the film from aging too quickly and allows international audiences to project their own interpretations. The satire isn't about who is in power, it's about what power does to people when stripped of ceremony and security. Structurally, the midpoint is where the screenplay reveals its real ambition. Instead of offering a clean reversal or emotional breakthrough, the story complicates relationships further. Trust doesn't arrive all at once. It's transactional, conditional, and frequently broken. That choice deepens character arcs by forcing growth through repeated failure rather than a single revelatory moment. It's messier, more human, and far more interesting than the typical action comedy handshake of mutual respect halfway through. Dialogue rhythm deserves special mention. The script favors short exchanges over monologues, often cutting conversations off mid-thought as action interrupts speech. This creates a sense of urgency and realism. People don't finish sentences when bullets are flying. The writing understands that silence can be as revealing as dialogue. Moments where characters choose not to speak, where pride, fear, or uncertainty stalls them, carry as much narrative weight as any quip. What the screenplay avoids is just as important as what it embraces. There's minimal backstory dumping. Character histories are implied through behavior, not explained through flashbacks. Exposition is disguised as argument or deflection. When characters talk about responsibility, failure, or legacy, it feels personal rather than thematic. The script resists preaching. It lets contradictions stand. Leaders can be brave and cowardly in the same scene. That ambiguity gives the story texture. By the time the narrative barrels toward its final act, the screenplay has done something essential. It's made the action feel consequential, not because the world might end, but because these characters might finally understand each other or fail to. The stakes become emotional without abandoning spectacle. That balance is the script's quiet triumph. But words on a page are only half the equation. A screenplay like this lives or dies by who embodies it, by whether the characters feel distinct enough to justify all that conflict and collision. And that brings us to the most visible gamble the film makes, casting two stars whose personas carry as much weight as the offices their characters occupy. Some movies feel cast by committee. Heads of State feels cast by collision. The central gamble wasn't just attaching big names, it was pairing two performers whose screen personas carry radically different ideas of authority. Idris Elba and John Cena don't simply play leaders, they project leadership in opposing frequencies. That contrast is the engine. Without it, the script's tension collapses into noise. With it, every exchange sparks. Elba arrives with gravity baked in. His career has conditioned audiences to trust him before he says a word. There's weight in his stillness, a sense that calculation is always happening behind the eyes. That makes him a natural fit for a character defined by control, someone accustomed to rooms going quiet when he speaks. Casting Elba isn't just about acting ability, it's about what his presence signals instantly. The film doesn't need exposition to establish authority. Elba walks in and you believe it. Cena operates on a completely different wavelength. His authority is loud, performative, occasionally insecure. Years of wrestling and comedy have sharpened his self-awareness. He understands the absurdity of masculinity as spectacle. That awareness is weaponized here. Cena's character projects confidence with almost aggressive enthusiasm, the kind that fills silence because silence feels dangerous. Put him next to Elba, and the contrast becomes visual, rhythmic, and psychological. What makes the casting inspired is that neither actor is asked to abandon their persona. Instead, the film interrogates it. Elba's calm starts to crack under pressure. Cena's bravado starts to look like armor. The movie understands that star power isn't something to hide. It's something to use. Their public images become subtext. When they argue, it's not just characters clashing. It's cinematic shorthand for two philosophies of leadership colliding in real time. Chemistry tests were crucial here, and you can feel the intentionality. The rhythm between them isn't about perfect timing, it's about interruption. They talk over each other. They misread tone. They assume motives. That friction feels rehearsed in the best way. Engineered chaos rather than accidental mismatch. The casting works because neither actor dominates the frame consistently. Control shifts scene by scene, sometimes line by line. The supporting casting reinforces this dynamic rather than diluting it. Instead of surrounding the leads with scene stealers competing for attention, the film opts for performers who ground the world. Advisors, operatives, antagonists. They're cast with restraint. Faces that feel plausible rather than flashy. That choice keeps the focus locked on the central relationship without flattening the world around it. There is also a subtle intelligence in how physicality is deployed. Elba's movements are economical. Cena's are expansive. Action scenes are staged to highlight that difference. One conserves energy. The other burns it fast. These aren't accidental traits. They're extensions of character psychology translated into motion. Casting here isn't about line delivery. It's about how bodies occupy space under stress. Against-type casting is used sparingly but effectively. Certain roles arrive with expectations and then quietly undermine them. Authority figures who fold. Secondary characters who surprise with competence. The casting department understands that surprise doesn't come from randomness. It comes from placing familiar faces just slightly out of alignment with what we expect. Availability and logistics clearly played a role. This is a production juggling massive schedules. But the final ensemble doesn't feel compromised by practicality. It feels curated. Each actor serves a function within the film's ecosystem, reinforcing tone rather than competing with it. No one feels like stunt casting. No one feels wasted. By the time the film settles into its rhythm, the casting decision reveals its real purpose. It allows the story to explore leadership as performance. Who leads through silence? Who leads through volume? Who adapts? Who resists? Who resists? Those questions only work because the actors embody them so cleanly that the audience understands the conflict before it's ever explained. But casting sets the stage. Performance is where the film either cashes the check or bounces it. And that brings us to the real test. How these two leads transform concept into character, moment by moment, under pressure. The real measure of heads of state isn't whether the action lands or the jokes connect. It's whether the two leads can turn a high-concept premise into lived-in behavior. This is where the film either becomes a disposable streaming item or something sturdier. Idris Elba and John Cena don't just carry the movie. They define its emotional geometry. bending every scene around their contrasting approaches to power, vulnerability, and control. Elba's performance is built on restraint. He plays authority not as dominance, but as burden. Watch his posture in early scenes, shoulders squared, movements minimal, eyes constantly scanning. This is a man trained to absorb chaos without revealing it. Elba understands that leadership, especially at the highest level, often looks like stillness under pressure. His voice rarely rises. When it does, it lands like a crack in glass. That control gives the character credibility, but it also sets up the arc. Because when control fails, and it does, the collapse feels earned. What's striking is how little Elba telegraphs emotion. He lets silence do the work. In moments where a lesser performance would lean into speechifying, Elba pulls inward. A delayed response. A jaw tightening, then relaxing. You can see decisions forming and being abandoned in real time. That internal processing gives the action stakes beyond survival. He's not just fighting enemies. He's fighting the instinct to retreat back into protocol when instinct is the only thing that might save him. Cena, meanwhile, attacks the role from the opposite direction. His performance is outward, kinetic, occasionally reckless. He weaponizes enthusiasm. Early on, his confidence reads as bravado bordering on parody, but that's the trap. Beneath the volume is a character deeply aware of being watched. Cena plays leadership as performance, every gesture calibrated, every joke a shield. His timing is crucial. He knows exactly when to push a line too far, then pull back just enough to keep sympathy intact. The brilliance of Cena's work here is that he allows the mask to slip gradually. Not in one big emotional confession, but in micro-failures. A joke that lands flat. A smile that arrives a second too late. A burst of anger that surprises even him. These moments recalibrate how we read the character. What initially feels like comic relief starts to register as defense mechanism. Cena's physicality does heavy lifting here. He moves like someone who burns energy to avoid stillness, because stillness invites doubt. Their shared scenes crackle because neither performance is trying to win. Elba doesn't overpower Cena with gravitas. Cena doesn't undercut Elba with comedy. Instead, they listen, really listen, and react in ways that feel unscripted even when the dialogue is tight. Arguments overlap. Reactions interrupt lines. You feel the friction of two leadership styles grinding against each other without resolution. That tension sustains scenes that could have easily devolved into formulaic banter. Action sequences double as performance showcases. Elba fights with efficiency, short movements, defensive positioning, conservation of energy. Cena fights like momentum incarnate, charging forward, absorbing impact, relying on sheer force of will. These choices aren't just choreography, they're character expression. When Elba hesitates before a risky move, it reads as calculation. When Cena charges ahead, it reads as refusal to think too long. Same danger. Completely different psychology. One standout sequence hinges less on violence and more on trust, or the lack of it. Elba's character pauses, weighing options, while Cena's presses forward, demanding action. The tension isn't about what happens next, but about who gets to decide. Elba plays the moment with barely visible frustration. Cena responds with forced humor that curdles into irritation. No monologues. No declarations. Just two men realizing that leadership doesn't mean the same thing to both of them. The scene works because both actors commit to understatement where overstatement would have been easier. Chemistry like this doesn't happen accidentally. It's built through mutual restraint. Neither actor reaches for applause moments. Elba resists the temptation to dominate emotionally. Cena resists the urge to turn every beat into a joke. That discipline allows the film to earn its emotional turns. When genuine respect finally surfaces, it feels like a process, not a plot requirement. There's also a self-awareness threaded through both performances. Elba subtly plays against his own mythos, allowing moments of uncertainty that challenge his usual unshakable image. Cena does the opposite, leaning into his larger-than-life persona, then exposing the cost of maintaining it. Together, they form a complete picture of modern power, composed authority versus performative confidence, both flawed, both necessary. By the end, the question isn't who's right, it's who's willing to change. And both actors sell that evolution not through speeches, but through behavior, how they move, when they speak, when they stop. That's acting craft doing quiet, heavy work. Yet even the strongest lead performances don't exist in a vacuum. They need texture, resistance, and contrast from the world around them. And that's where the supporting cast steps in. Not as background noise, but as the pressure system that forces these two performances to fully ignite. Big action films love to pretend their power comes from scale. Heads of State knows better. Its real strength comes from pressure, and pressure only exists when the world around the leads pushes back with credibility. That's where the supporting cast earns its keep. These performances don't compete for spotlight, they tighten the screws. The smartest choice the film makes is refusing to turn secondary characters into punchline dispensers or disposable plot devices. Each supporting role is designed to stress test the lead's authority. Advisors question decisions. Operatives hesitate. Antagonists exploit hesitation. Every interaction forces Elba's controlled composure and Cena's performative confidence into confrontation with reality. Power doesn't exist in a vacuum here. It's constantly challenged. Several supporting performances operate in quiet counterpoint to the leads. Instead of grandstanding, they play realism. Their reactions ground scenes that could have tipped into absurdity. When chaos erupts, these characters don't deliver quips. They freeze, reassess, adapt, or fail. That behavioral authenticity matters. It keeps the film tethered to consequence even when the premise leans fantastical. The ensemble chemistry feels deliberate rather than coincidental. Characters don't orbit the leads. They intersect with them. One advisor's cautious pragmatism becomes a mirror for Elba's internal conflict. Another character's impatience reflects Cena's impulse to act first and justify later. These parallels aren't announced. They're felt. The movie trusts the audience to register patterns without explanation. Veteran performers are used strategically. Instead of dominating scenes, they stabilize them. A well-timed reaction shot from an experienced actor can do more than pages of dialogue. The film understands that authority isn't just spoken, it's observed. When a secondary character doubts a decision, that doubt lands because the performance feels lived in rather than theatrical. Breakout roles emerge not through showiness, but through precision. A few actors carve out memorable presence with minimal screen time by committing fully to their function within the story. A technician who refuses an order. A security figure who hesitates at the wrong moment. These aren't big arcs, but they're sharp ones. Each small choice compounds the tension. Leadership becomes less about issuing commands and more about earning compliance under fire. The antagonistic forces are particularly well calibrated. Instead of a single over-designed villain, the film opts for opposition that feels systemic. Threats come from networks, agendas, and misaligned incentives rather than monologues. This choice reinforces the film's thematic spine. Power isn't toppled by one enemy, it's eroded by complexity. The supporting cast embodies that complexity, giving the lead something more interesting to fight than a face. Off-screen dynamics clearly influenced on-screen cohesion. Scenes feel rehearsed without feeling stiff. There's a rhythm to how lines are exchanged, how interruptions land, how silence stretches. That rhythm suggests a cast comfortable enough to let moments breathe. No one rushes to fill space. That restraint allows tension to accumulate naturally. Crucially, the film resists the temptation to sentimentalize the ensemble. Supporting characters aren't there to reassure the leads or validate their growth prematurely. They challenge, resist, and sometimes undermine. Respect is earned late and selectively. That choice keeps character development honest. Growth isn't rewarded automatically. It's tested repeatedly. One of the film's most effective ensemble moments isn't an action sequence at all, but a fractured conversation where multiple characters speak past each other each operating with incomplete information. The scene works because every actor commits to their own objective rather than servicing the lead's arc. The confusion feels organic. Authority blurs. Control slips. The ensemble becomes a narrative force rather than decorative texture. By the time the story accelerates toward its later movements, the supporting cast has done essential work. They've expanded the film's emotional and political terrain without bloating it. They've turned leadership into a communal experience rather than a solo performance. And most importantly, they've ensured that when the leads finally adapt, it feels like response, not destiny. All of this performance work exists inside a physical world that either supports or undermines credibility. Characters don't act in abstraction. They move through spaces designed to communicate power, decay, and pressure before a single line is spoken. And that brings us to the next layer of the film's craft: the environments, textures, and visual decisions that give Heads of State its tangible sense of place. Power in Heads of State isn't just spoken. It's built into walls, corridors, vehicles, and clothing. The film's production design understands a crucial truth: environments shape behavior. Before a character issues a command or throws a punch, the space around them has already defined what kind of authority is possible. This is where the movie quietly deepens its themes, using physical design to externalize internal conflict. The visual world is constructed around contrast. Early settings emphasize order, symmetry, clean lines, controlled palettes. Offices feel curated rather than lived in. Corridors stretch long and straight, designed for visibility and surveillance. These spaces don't invite spontaneity, they enforce procedure. Characters move through them with practiced familiarity, bodies adapting to architecture built for power. You feel how much routine props these leaders up before the plot strips that scaffolding away. Once the narrative fractures, so do the spaces. The film transitions into environments that resist control: tight interiors, improvised shelters, unstable locations where exits aren't obvious and plans can't survive contact with reality. Production design shifts subtly but decisively. Clean geometry gives way to clutter. Neutral palettes absorb grime and shadow. The world starts pushing back. Characters no longer dominate rooms, they negotiate with them. This shift isn't decorative, it's psychological. As authority erodes, spaces become more tactile and less forgiving. Rough textures replace polished surfaces. Lighting sources feel practical rather than institutional. You sense the absence of infrastructure. The design team leans into imperfection, allowing environments to feel occupied by time, conflict, and consequence. These aren't sets that exist to be destroyed. They exist to be endured. Costume design plays an equally strategic role. Early wardrobe choices reinforce hierarchy. Tailoring is sharp, colors restrained, silhouettes controlled. Clothing signals status instantly. As the film progresses, those signals degrade. Jackets come off. Fabric creases. Colors darken or dull. The costumes chart a quiet journey from representation to survival. By the midpoint, clothing isn't about image. It's about function. That transition mirrors the character's internal recalibration. What's especially effective is how costumes differentiate leadership styles. One character's wardrobe favors structure and minimalism, reinforcing discipline and restraint. Another leans into bolder choices that command attention. Neither approach is judged outright. Instead, the film lets circumstance interrogate them. In moments of chaos, rigid formality becomes liability. In moments requiring trust, performative flair rings hollow. Clothing becomes argument. Props are used sparingly but with intention. Objects aren't flashy, they're practical, often worn, sometimes unreliable. A piece of equipment that fails at the wrong moment. A vehicle that offers protection but also confinement. These details ground the action. They remind you that systems are built by humans, and humans make compromises. Nothing feels like a miracle solution. Everything has weight. The film's approach to scale is particularly smart. Instead of overwhelming the viewer with endless grand locations, It alternates between expansive and claustrophobic spaces. Large environments emphasize exposure, no place to hide, too many variables to control. Smaller spaces heighten intimacy and friction. Arguments feel sharper when there's nowhere to step back. The production design uses spatial pressure as narrative pressure. There's also a deliberate avoidance of visual excess. The film resists turning every location into a spectacle. Many environments are almost aggressively functional. That restraint allows moments of visual emphasis to land harder when they arrive. When a location does feel imposing or symbolic, it's because the story has earned it. Design serves narrative, not the other way around. Period or geopolitical specificity is handled with care. Instead of anchoring settings to recognizable real-world landmarks too explicitly, the design favors a hybrid realism. Places feel authentic without being distractingly literal. This abstraction keeps the story from collapsing into topicality. The world feels global without becoming a travelogue. Power, not geography, is the organizing principle. Perhaps the most telling design choice is how spaces respond to violence. Damage feels cumulative. Environments don't reset between sequences. Broken elements stay broken. Scars remain visible. That continuity reinforces consequence. Action doesn't exist in a vacuum. It alters the world characters must continue navigating. The design team understands that destruction is only meaningful if it lingers. By the time the film reaches its later stages, the production design has completed a full thematic arc. The world has shifted from orderly to unstable, from symbolic to survival-oriented. Characters no longer move through spaces designed to serve them. They adapt to spaces that don't care who they are. That evolution is felt rather than stated, and it's essential to why the film's emotional stakes land. All of this physical craftsmanship would be inert without a camera language capable of translating space into feeling. Design creates the world. Cinematography decides how we experience it, what we notice, and how tension is framed second by second. That visual storytelling is the next crucial layer holding heads of state together. Cinematography is where heads of state stops being just well-designed and starts feeling alive. The camera doesn't admire the world from a distance. It participates. Every choice in framing, movement, and light reinforces the film's central anxiety: control is temporary, perspective is fragile, and power depends on where you're standing. The visual language begins with stability. Early scenes favor composed frames, balanced symmetry, and measured camera movement. Shots feel deliberate, almost ceremonial. The camera observes rather than intrudes. This establishes a visual baseline of order-authority as something fixed and reliable. You trust the frame. You know where to look. That confidence is intentional because the film spends the rest of its runtime dismantling it. As soon as the narrative fractures, the camera loosens its grip. Movement becomes reactive. Handheld work creeps in. Not the chaotic kind that disorients, but the kind that breathes. The lens adjusts mid-action. Focus hunts. The camera feels human. This shift subtly aligns the viewer with the character's experience. Plans unravel, and the image reflects that uncertainty without calling attention to itself. Action sequences are staged with clarity as the priority. This is a Naishuller signature. The camera doesn't flail. It commits. You always understand geography, where bodies are in relation to exits, threats, and each other. That spatial awareness makes the violence feel consequential rather than decorative. When a hit lands, you feel the setup. When someone goes down, you know why. Chaos is earned through accumulation, not confusion. Lens choices play a quiet but crucial role. Wider lenses are used aggressively in close quarters, exaggerating distance and distortion. Faces stretch slightly at the edges. Spaces feel tighter than they are. It's a visual cue that comfort has vanished. In more controlled environments, the film shifts toward longer focal lengths, compressing space and reinforcing hierarchy. Who appears dominant in the frame often has less to do with dialogue and more to do with optics. Lighting follows the same psychological arc. Institutional spaces are evenly lit, minimizing shadow. Information is visible, nothing hides. As the story progresses, contrast increases. Practical light sources dominate lamps, screens, vehicle lights, creating pockets of visibility surrounded by uncertainty. Faces fall in and out of shadow mid-conversation. Moral clarity blurs. You're no longer sure what you're allowed to see. One of the film's most effective visual strategies is how it handles power reversals. Early on, the camera looks up at certain characters, subtly reinforcing authority. Later, that same visual language is inverted. The camera lowers, flattens, or crowds them. These aren't showy tricks. They're almost invisible, but they register emotionally. You feel the shift before you consciously recognize it. Camera movement during dialogue scenes deserves attention. The film rarely locks into static shot-reverse shot patterns. Instead, the camera drifts, circles, or slowly encroaches. Conversations feel unstable, like ground that could give way at any moment. This keeps even quiet scenes charged with tension. You're never allowed to relax into conversational rhythm. Something always feels slightly off. Editing works in tandem with cinematography to maintain momentum without sacrificing coherence. Cuts are motivated by action or reaction, not by rhythm alone. The film avoids hyperactive editing in favor of sustained shots that let physical performance register. When cuts accelerate, it's because characters are losing control, not because the film is trying to manufacture excitement artificially. There's a particularly effective use of negative space throughout. The camera frequently leaves room in the frame. Empty corridors, open doors, unseen corners. That absence becomes threat. The audience starts scanning frames instinctively, anticipating intrusion. It's a visual tension that doesn't require music or dialogue. Just space. Just waiting. Color grading remains restrained. The palette favors realism over stylization, allowing shifts in tone to feel organic. When color does assert itself, it's tied to environment rather than emotion. The film doesn't tell you how to feel through color. It lets circumstance do the work. That trust in the viewer is refreshing. By the time the film reaches its most intense moments, the cinematography has completed its transformation. What began as composed observation has become reactive immersion. The camera no longer controls the scene. It survives it. That evolution mirrors the character's journey perfectly. Authority gives way to adaptability. Distance collapses into immediacy. Sound in Heads of State doesn't decorate the action, it stalks it. The film's audio landscape is built on restraint, knowing exactly when to press and when to disappear. Instead of announcing emotion, the sound design works subcutaneously, shaping tension before the audience has time to intellectualize it. You don't always notice what you're hearing, you feel it. The score avoids heroic grandstanding. There are no swelling anthems declaring righteousness or victory. Music enters cautiously, often mid-scene rather than at emotional peaks. Themes emerge in fragments, rhythmic pulses, low-frequency drones, restrained motifs that hover rather than resolve. This choice aligns perfectly with the film's worldview. Leadership here isn't triumphant. It's precarious. The music understands that certainty would be dishonest. When the score does assert itself, it does so through texture rather than melody. Percussion feels industrial, almost mechanical, as if echoing systems grinding under pressure. Synth elements creep rather than soar. The soundscape leans into tension over release. You're rarely given the relief of musical closure. Notes hang unresolved. Rhythms cut off abruptly. That denial of catharsis keeps nerves taut. One of the film's most effective tools is silence. Not empty silence, but charged silence. Dialogue scenes often allow background noise to recede until all that remains is breath, fabric movement, the subtle hum of a room. These moments feel intimate and dangerous. Without musical guidance, the audience is forced to read faces, pauses, and micro-reactions. Silence becomes confrontation. Action sequences are mixed with remarkable discipline. Instead of burying everything under sonic overload, the film prioritizes specificity. You hear impacts distinctly, the difference between metal striking concrete, flesh hitting glass, boots scraping across uneven ground. Gunfire isn't stylized into a rhythmic pattern. It's sharp, disruptive, and exhausting. Each sound has weight. Repetition wears you down the same way it wears down the characters. Diegetic sound plays a major role in grounding the film. Sirens, alarms, radio chatter, engines. They aren't background texture. They're narrative information. Overlapping audio creates confusion that mirrors the character's limited understanding of their situation. Orders are missed. Instructions conflict. Sound becomes a battlefield of its own, full of competing signals demanding attention. The film is particularly smart about how it uses volume. Loud moments are allowed to be genuinely loud, but they're rationed. That makes them startling when they arrive. Because so much of the sound design lives in controlled restraint, spikes in volume feel invasive rather than exciting. Your body reacts before your brain catches up. That physiological response is intentional. Music and sound design intertwine seamlessly. In several sequences, it's difficult to tell where one ends and the other begins. Rhythmic elements blur with mechanical noise. Ambient tones merge with score. This fusion reinforces the idea that systems, political, technological, personal, are indistinguishable once they're in motion. Everything hums with the same anxious energy. There's also a refusal to sentimentalize emotional beats through music. When characters face moments of reckoning, the score often pulls back instead of leaning in. The absence forces honesty. You're not told how to feel. You're asked to sit with discomfort. That choice respects the intelligence of the audience and the integrity of the performances. The final act's soundscape reflects accumulated fatigue. Audio becomes denser, more layered, less clean. Clarity degrades. You feel how long the characters have been running, thinking, reacting. By this point, the sound design isn't just supporting the narrative, it is the narrative. Exhaustion becomes audible. By the time the film resolves, the audio landscape has completed its arc. What began as controlled, almost sterile sound has become messy, human, and raw. Systems break down. Signals overlap. Silence carries consequence. The sound tells the same story as the characters. Control is an illusion. Adaptability is survival. All of this craft, visual, sonic, performative, comes from a production that had to function under real-world pressure. Big ideas don't translate cleanly to set without friction. Schedules tighten. Locations fight back. Plans fail. And sometimes, the story behind the camera is as tense and revealing as the one unfolding on screen. That journey, the human chaos of making heads of state, is where the film's ambition was truly tested. Big action films sell the illusion of control. The production of Heads of State lived in the opposite reality. From the outset, this was a shoot defined by logistical pressure. Multiple locations, heavy security considerations, complex stunt work, and two leads whose schedules alone could sink a lesser production. What makes the behind-the-scenes story compelling isn't chaos for its own sake, but how that pressure reshaped the film's final identity. The shoot unfolded like the movie itself, carefully planned on paper, aggressively unpredictable in practice. Location-heavy production meant constant recalibration. Permits shifted. Weather refused cooperation. Spaces that looked manageable during scouting became restrictive once cameras, crew, and choreography collided. Instead of fighting those limitations, the production leaned into them. Tight spaces weren't rewritten out. They were redesigned for. Constriction became texture. Naishuller's on-set style proved essential here. He's not a director who isolates himself behind monitors. He stays close to the action, adjusting sequences in real time. That flexibility allowed the film to absorb disruptions without losing momentum. When a planned movement became impossible, the camera moved instead, When choreography needed simplification, character behavior absorbed the change. These weren't compromises. They were adaptations that often improved the scene. Stunt coordination was one of the production's most demanding elements. The film favors physical interaction over digital safety nets, which meant extended rehearsal periods and constant risk management. Injuries were avoided not through caution alone, but through precision. Action beats were designed around what performers could actually execute repeatedly without degradation. Fatigue was accounted for. Breathing patterns mattered. Exhaustion wasn't hidden. It was planned. Both leads committed fully to that physicality. Elba approached action methodically, treating movement like dialogue, every choice intentional. Cena leaned into endurance, pushing sequences until fatigue visibly registered. That difference required careful calibration from the stunt team. Scenes had to feel cohesive while honoring each performer's natural rhythm. Coordination wasn't about uniformity. It was about contrast that still read as a single moment. Improvisation played a larger role than expected. Several character moments emerged not from scripted beats, but from reactions to disrupted plans. A delayed setup, a missed cue, a line delivered late because the environment demanded attention. Instead of resetting endlessly, the director often rolled with it. Those imperfections added texture. The film breathes because it allows friction to show. Crew coordination became its own balancing act, with sequences requiring simultaneous movement across departments. Camera, stunts, sound, safety communication had to be airtight. And yet, the production resisted overstructuring. There was room for spontaneous problem-solving. That trust filtered down. Departments weren't just executing orders, they were collaborating under shared pressure. That cohesion shows in the final cut. Reshoots, when they happened, weren't about fixing failures. They were about refinement, tightening rhythm, clarifying geography, sharpening emotional beats discovered during editing. The film didn't radically reinvent itself in post-production, it clarified itself. That's the mark of a shoot that found its identity early, even when circumstances tested it. Perhaps the most revealing behind-the-scenes detail is how morale was maintained. Long days, physically demanding sequences, tight turnarounds, and yet, by most accounts, the set culture emphasized momentum over stress. Humor mattered. Downtime was protected where possible. The tone mirrored the film's own balancing act. Serious stakes, lightened by human connection. By the time production wrapped, Heads of State wasn't just a movie assembled from parts, it was a film shaped by resistance. Every constraint left fingerprints. Every workaround became a choice. The final product carries that history, and its texture scenes feel earned because they were. But making a movie is only half the battle. Once cameras stop rolling, a different kind of pressure begins. Numbers replace instincts. Success is measured in clicks, charts, and algorithms. How Heads of State entered the marketplace, and what those numbers actually mean, is the next chapter in understanding its place in the modern film landscape. By the time Heads of State reached audiences, the rules of success had already shifted beneath its feet. This isn't a traditional theatrical rollout story. It's a case study in modern visibility, where reach matters as much as revenue, and perception often outweighs raw numbers. Measuring commercial impact here requires reading between the lines rather than scanning box office leaderboards. As a streaming-first release backed by a major studio platform, the film wasn't chasing opening weekend headlines in the conventional sense. Its success metrics lived inside a different ecosystem: subscriber engagement, completion rates, global reach, and long-tail performance. That changes everything. Instead of a single explosive debut, Heads of State was designed for sustained discovery, something closer to cultural persistence than box office dominance. Star power played a crucial role in positioning. Idris Elba and John Cena aren't just actors, they're marketing engines with cross-demographic appeal. Their presence ensured immediate visibility, cutting through an overcrowded content landscape. The film didn't need weeks of slow build. awareness arrived fully formed. That kind of instant recognition is invaluable in a streaming environment where audiences make decisions in seconds, not days. Genre also worked in the film's favor. Action comedy remains one of the most reliable categories for broad engagement, especially internationally. The political elements were abstract enough to avoid alienation, while the action remained universally legible. That balance helped the film travel. It didn't rely on cultural specificity or linguistic nuance. Momentum, conflict, and physical stakes translate everywhere. What's particularly interesting is how the film's performance benefited from rewatchability. This isn't a puzzle box narrative you consume once and shelve. It's built for momentum and chemistry elements that reward casual revisits. Streaming platforms value that behavior enormously. A film that viewers return to, even partially, carries more algorithmic weight than one that spikes and disappears. Critical discourse also fed into commercial life. The movie positioned itself as more than disposable entertainment without demanding arthouse patience. That middle ground identity widened its audience. Viewers who might normally skip action comedies found something sturdier here. Viewers who wanted spectacle still got it. That overlap is rare and profitable in the streaming age. Marketing leaned into tone rather than plot. Trailers emphasized clash, energy, and personality over narrative complexity. That strategy worked because the film's appeal isn't mystery. It's execution. Audiences weren't promised twists. They were promised a ride. And the film delivered on that contract, which matters more than surprise in sustaining word of mouth. Longevity is where Heads of State quietly asserts itself. Instead of burning bright and vanishing, it settled into platform rotation, recommended alongside other star-driven action titles, resurfacing during promotional cycles, weekends, and algorithmic reshuffles. That kind of persistent visibility builds cumulative value over time. It becomes a reliable click rather than a fleeting event. Financially, the film represents a broader studio strategy, investing heavily in talent, forward, mid to high budget originals that anchor streaming libraries. Profitability isn't measured in ticket sales, but in subscriber retention and brand perception. In that context, Heads of State functions as infrastructure, a title that signals scale, confidence, and consistency. What the numbers ultimately suggest, without needing to cite them, is that the film met its mandate. It didn't redefine the industry. It didn't collapse under ambition. It did what modern studio originals are increasingly asked to do: justify their existence through sustained engagement rather than momentary spectacle. But commercial performance is only part of the story. Numbers explain reach, not resonance. To understand how Heads of State actually landed, you have to look at response. How critics framed it, how audiences debated it, and what conversations it sparked once the algorithm stopped pushing and people started talking. By the time Heads of State settled into the cultural bloodstream, the conversation around it had clarified into something more interesting than simple praise or dismissal. This wasn't a film critics argued over because it failed. It was one they debated because it refused to fit neatly into expectations. Reception split less along quality lines and more along taste, tone, and what audiences wanted from modern action cinema. Critical response largely converged on one point: the film's chemistry works. Reviews consistently highlighted the Elba-Cena dynamic as the engine that keeps everything moving. Even critics lukewarm on the plot mechanics or political abstraction acknowledged that the performances elevated material that could have easily felt generic. That consensus matters. When critics agree on a core strength, it often becomes the film's long-term identity. Where opinions diverged was ambition. Some critics wanted sharper satire, arguing that the film gestures toward political commentary without fully committing. Others saw that restraint as intentional and wise. By keeping ideology abstract, the film avoids turning into a lecture or a time capsule. The debate itself reveals something important. Heads of State invited interpretation rather than dictating it. For a mainstream action comedy, That's no small feat. Audience response leaned warmer and more immediate. Viewers gravitated toward momentum, humor, and rewatch value rather than thematic density. Online discourse emphasized favorite moments, line deliveries, and action beats. The conversation felt less like critique and more like enjoyment. Sharing clips circulated, scenes were quoted, chemistry became shorthand. That kind of response signals connection rather than admiration from a distance. What's notable is the absence of significant backlash. In an era where politically adjacent films often trigger polarized reactions, Heads of State sidestepped outrage almost entirely. Its abstraction insulated it. Without explicit real-world targets, audiences projected rather than reacted defensively. That neutrality became a feature, not a flaw, allowing the film to exist across ideological lines without becoming a proxy battle. Award attention was minimal and expected. This isn't the kind of film that campaigns aggressively or fits traditional prestige lanes. But its lack of trophies doesn't diminish its cultural footprint. Not every film needs validation from ceremonies to matter. Some earn their relevance through circulation rather than canonization. Social media response further reinforced the film's identity as a chemistry-forward experience. Memes focused on contrast, seriousness versus bravado, silence versus noise. Clips highlighting reaction shots and interrupted dialogue traveled well, suggesting audiences connected to behavior more than plot. That aligns perfectly with the film's strengths. It's remembered for how it felt, not what it said. Long-term critical reevaluation may be kind to this film. As streaming originals continue to flood platforms, titles that combine craft, personality, and restraint tend to age better than louder, emptier spectacles. Heads of State doesn't chase trends, it sidesteps them. That quality often reads as modest at first, then intentional with distance. What ultimately defines the reception is balance. Critics saw a film that didn't fully bite into its sharpest potential. Audiences saw a film that delivered exactly what it promised and did it well. Both readings can be true. And in that overlap lives the film's real success. It satisfied without exhausting, entertained without insulting, and lingered without demanding obsession. Which brings us to the final question. The one that only time can really answer. What does Heads of State mean beneath the action and banter? What ideas does it leave behind once the noise fades? And where does it sit in the evolving landscape of leadership stories, action cinema, and star-driven filmmaking? When the dust settles, Heads of State leaves behind a quieter set of questions than its explosions suggest. Strip away the chases, the banter, the bruises, and what remains is a film deeply skeptical of authority as performance, and cautiously hopeful about authority as responsibility. It's not a movie about saving the world. It's a movie about surviving the gap between who you're supposed to be and who you actually are when systems fail. The central theme running beneath everything is the fragility of control. Titles, offices, security details, all of it evaporates the moment conditions shift. The film keeps returning to this idea from different angles: leadership without infrastructure, power without insulation, decision-making without certainty. What it argues, gently but persistently, is that authority isn't proven in command rooms. It's revealed in transit, under pressure, when no one is watching and nothing is scripted. That idea is reinforced through contrast. One lead embodies restraint, process, and calculated silence. The other embodies visibility, momentum, and performative confidence. Neither approach is villainized. Neither is crowned correct. Instead, the film suggests that leadership collapses when it calcifies, when it refuses to adapt. Survival belongs to those willing to shed the version of themselves that no longer fits the moment. Growth here isn't ideological. It's behavioral. There's also a subtle meditation on masculinity woven through the film. Not in speeches or declarations, but in posture, reaction, and vulnerability. Strength isn't framed as dominance. It's framed as endurance, physical, emotional, ethical. The movie allows its leads to be wrong, tired, afraid, and reactive without stripping them of dignity. That's rare in action cinema, which often treats vulnerability as weakness to be overcome, rather than information to be processed. Politically, Heads of State chooses abstraction over specificity, and that choice defines its legacy. By refusing to anchor itself to real-world administrations or partisan dynamics, the film avoids expiration. It's less interested in policy than in psychology. Power is treated as a condition, not a platform. That restraint frustrates viewers looking for sharper satire. But it also gives the film longevity. Years from now, it won't feel dated. It will feel generalized, almost allegorical. Genre-wise, the film occupies an increasingly rare middle ground. It's not parody. It's not grim realism. It's not empty spectacle. It's a reminder that action films can still be character-driven without sacrificing momentum. That balance, chemistry first, craft forward, ego-aware, is where the film quietly innovates. It doesn't reinvent the genre. It recalibrates it. In the context of the director's career, Heads of State represents maturation. The kinetic chaos is still there, but it's disciplined now. Energy is directed rather than unleashed indiscriminately. The film trusts pauses. It trusts faces. It trusts the audience to follow emotional logic instead of being bludgeoned by constant escalation. That confidence signals a filmmaker growing into scale rather than being consumed by it. For the leads, the film occupies an interesting space in their filmographies. It doesn't redefine either persona, but it refines them. One leans into restraint as strength. The other interrogates performance as armor. Together, they create a dynamic that feels less like a gimmick and more like a conversation about modern leadership. One that's messy, unresolved, and ongoing. Rewatchability is one of the film's quiet strengths, not because of hidden plot mechanics, but because behavior reveals more on repeat viewing. Pauses make more sense. Reactions carry added weight. The film rewards attention without demanding obsession. That's a difficult balance, and it lands. Is it flawless? No. The abstraction that grants longevity also limits bite. Certain narrative turns feel designed for momentum rather than inevitability. Some viewers will want sharper teeth, clearer targets, louder statements. That's a fair critique. The film chooses breadth over incision. But here's the thing. It knows exactly what it is. It doesn't posture as something deeper than it is, nor does it apologize for being entertaining. It respects craft, prioritizes chemistry, and understands that spectacle without humanity evaporates quickly. Heads of State doesn't evaporate. It lingers. This is a film for viewers who enjoy action anchored in personality. For audiences who want banter with bruises, tension with texture, leadership portrayed as something learned rather than possessed. It's not a manifesto. It's a pressure test.